First come the worst, my peoples come first. I got worldwide family all over the earth, and I worry about them all for whatever it's worth.
Hello, everybody. My name is Houman Haddad. I'm the head of emerging technologies at the United Nations World Food Programme, and also the founder of the Building Blocks blockchain project. I am going to start by talking to you a little bit about our project, and then go into the importance of a governance framework, and particularly in our context, and then hopefully, time permitting, take a few questions at the end. Can you just confirm you can see me and also see my screen sharing?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Okay. So you may or may not be very familiar with the UN, but the UN is comprised of various organizations that and humanitarian community, of course, in general, NGOs included. Wherever there is crisis, we come in and we try to help however way we can. And our assistance can take different forms, such as cash, food, medicine, so on and so forth. Because of our traditional mandates, WFP, World Food Programme being food, WHO being health, some NGOs looking after children, education, we tend to look at the people we serve in a siloed manner. So we have one version of me, Houman, with WFP, another version with UNICEF, another one with Save the Children, another one with Mercy Corps, and we target our assistance accordingly. However, of course, people are not these fragmented pieces, they're whole beings. And ideally, we would be able to have a common view of who is assisting whom with what, and also how that assistance is being utilized, so that we can collectively optimize and harmonize our global aid. Now, to do that, there is, of course, a technical component, but it's also a political component. So, of course, if everybody agreed to use the same database, the same system, you would get that visibility of what goes in and what goes out. And why that's important is that there is a lot of correlation between the different kinds of assistance. So, of course, food, nutrition affects health, health and nutrition affect education, education affects gender-based violence, and so on and so forth. But we don't really have that visibility. But the issue, the political angle, is that unfortunately, even in our world as humanitarians, there is often sort of competition and rivalries, and there is this sort of our system versus yours kind of a thing, so that if a system is developed by some entity, other entities may not want to use that. So our idea and hope is that by using blockchain as a neutral network, so instead of saying, look, we developed a system, come use our system, we're saying we created a network, be a member of this network, run nodes on it, let's create the infrastructure. And on top of this infrastructure, let's run various services. So WFP is something to do with food, perhaps someone else something to do with education, something to do with health. And so this way, we can amalgamate the various pieces of information for each person and have common visibility. And of course, using many modern tools, be able to optimize and harmonize our collective assistance. And at the end of the day, of course, the aim is to be able to stretch our limited resources further and further empower the people that we serve. So on this screen, what I have is a concept that, a simplified blockchain address of ABC123, towards that various organizations contribute assistance, and from where this assistance can be redeemed in many different forms, such as cash in ATMs, or let's say vaccination, or food, or education, housing, energy, so on and so forth. So this is the core principle behind Building Blocks. And for example, if we do have that, by looking into under this address, you can see the different types of assistance that this person receives, such as food and cash again, and then separately how they utilize this assistance. Building Blocks started in 2017 with a pilot of 100 people. Then it went to 10,000 people in May of 2017, to 100,000 people in January of 2018. And as of today, we're serving 610,000 people, refugees in Bangladesh and Jordan, for the Rohingya refugees and the Syrian refugees. Our journey has been really a lot about learning, but also a lot about showing, because back in 2016, when we talked about blockchain in the humanitarian use case, the question often was, why do beneficiaries need Bitcoin and how might they use that entitlements and so on and so forth. So our journey was a lot about trying to show blockchain, of course, is not just a cryptocurrency, although that's a very valid application, but it can have other applications such as this assistance, coordination and tracking and so on and so forth. So we've done that. And of course, if we are the only organization using blockchain, then we really don't need the blockchain. The value comes in when multiple other organizations join. We are in the process of onboarding new members, and we're really excited about that. However, the issue becomes that, for example, during our first pilot, we used the public chain, and we quickly realized that the public network, at least as many might know, with its scalability issues, is too slow, it's too expensive. So for the moment, we've gone with a private permission network. So on a private network, while you might have something like proof of work that might really act as a big component of the governance, let's say, or incentives, we're using proof of authority. So because of that, we kind of really need a separate governance framework, and particularly because the type of work that we do and our fiduciary duty to protect the people that we serve, including their rights, including data protection, privacy. In a private permission network, we do need a very solid governance framework. And I'll get into the details of what components, for example, we have considered. One of the let's say challenges is that there are governance frameworks for consortia in the private sector, and typically a financial incentive or financial penalty plays an important role in the governance framework in terms of motivation to do the right thing, let's say. Within our context, though, we can't really use that as an incentive, being voluntarily funded organizations, charities. That just doesn't work. So we've had to kind of think through and come up with alternative ways of seeing how we can have a robust governance framework without necessarily having a financial incentive or penalty. So because of this, of course, we partnered with Consensus, not only because of their technical expertise, but also because of their vast experience working with the private sector, the governments, and the UN. And we looked at existing consortia, and we tried to pick and choose the most relevant parts for us and kind of bring them together in one place for it to be the building blocks governance framework. Again, noting that if you have one or two organizations working, it's easy to manage that between yourselves. But the whole point of this is a blockchain network. The power is in the network effect. You want many actors around it to get more visibility. And as the actors grow, you can't just rely on one-to-one relationships. You need a central, let's say, or fundamental, at least, principles by which to govern your network. So in our governance framework, again, with a lot of help from Consensus, some of the components we looked at are, for example, the membership criteria. So who could be a member of this network? We want it to be as inclusive as possible. At the same time, we do want to ensure that members have at a minimum the do no harm principles at heart. So as a core concept of our network, we don't store any personal information such as names or date of births, not even in encrypted format. We work purely off anonymous identifiers, but still, we just want to make sure that people who are coming in have that at heart. So, that's, let's say, one of the criteria we will use for who is eligible. Then once eligibility has been determined, one of the other questions was, well, how do you onboard and offboard members, and how does that happen off-chain and on-chain? And that's some of the other things we looked at, so that is covered, let's say, in the charter of the governance framework, and also perhaps with multi-signatory approach on chain for adding, let's say, new members to the chain and authorizing them. As I mentioned, data protection, privacy is and has always been a big concern. And also, as mentioned, we just kind of, our approach to that is that we don't even capture or store the data to begin with. But nonetheless, we want to make sure that's enshrined in the governance framework. People take adequate measures to protect access to the network, so on and so forth. And that's another big component that we spend time looking at. Network maintenance, of course, is another one. So that if if new Ethereum clients come out, and how do you upgrade to make sure the nodes and the network is healthy and continue operating. Also not included here is a provision for a technical committee. So what we want to do, as I noted, is to create this network, blockchain network, among the humanitarian community, on top of which people can deploy smart contracts for different use cases as they want. But we do also want to ensure that, let's say, people do not deploy buggy code that brings down the network on behalf of everyone. So we had to kind of think a little bit about how to balance this freedom of operation with the do no harm principle and with the technical complications that could come out of that. And to address that, we came up with various committees within the governance body, including a technical committee and an operations team that would address these kinds of issues. We had to think about dispute resolution. So the various kinds of disputes that could raise, whether at the overall governance body level or at the technical level, on-chain disputes, off-chain disputes, and how to resolve those. Another complexity that was added, in our case at least, is that UN has so-called privileges and immunities. And we wanted to ensure that, as this is not only a UN network, we wanted to ensure that other non-UN actors like NGOs who may join are not in any way disadvantaged, so that we're completely equal to each other when it comes to legal matters and being an international concept, determining legal jurisdiction. All of these other things are some of the things we're still actually thinking about. The governance framework is now, let's say, at the latest parts of the legal review. And there, yet another component was power on chain, so like voting rights and power off chain. And of course, this we thought about too, and there was various approaches. So some of them are some kind of, let's say, stake-based. So you could say the organization who has invested the more in the system, or the organization who's transferring more value through the system, or the organization who's assisting most people through the system, or a combination of these, has somehow more voting power, both in governance matters off-chain and also in terms of validating blocks on-chain. And of course, it's not just to say that people who have more resources are entitled to more voting power, but the idea, like proof of stake, is that if you have more skin in the game, that means you have a higher incentive to keep the network healthy and secure, and so on and so forth. At the same time, again, we felt that will disadvantage organizations who might not have as much resources or who might come in late to the game, and it would make it unfair. So our decision has been that each organization will have one vote, both off-chain and on-chain. There's always a balance to be reached there, because if the number of organizations become many, then coming to decisions can be difficult. But this is our first approach. We were taking a bit of an idealistic approach, and with time, we will test how well that will work in practice. So that was, let's say, the concept of voting power and fairness. I realize it's a very packed agenda today. And so I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our project and the work we've done on it, and also the way we're thinking about the governance of it, and the importance of governance, especially in a private permissioned network, consortia, that kind of thing. But I would like to leave the rest of the time for any questions or comments from the colleagues online. Over.
I have a question for you, Houman. Just to take a step back on the consortia and why you had to go through all these governance framework discussions. Who is going to be in this consortia? What is the goal, the overall goal of the consortia? And what was the process to bring in those new members?
Right. So who's going to be in this consortia is really, again, since it's a humanitarian project, is whatever organization is assisting people around the world with whatever, right? So again, with food, vaccination, education, shelter, whatever it might be. But in particular, organizations who tend to assist the same population. So of course, in refugee context, that tends to be many. I think in Jordan, for example, one of the places we're active, there's upward of 45 organizations assisting the same people between the UN, NGOs, government, and so on and so forth. In Bangladesh, it's even more. And since you're assisting the same people, there's always a chance for unequitable distribution of assistance. So that some of, let's say, the younger people who might be more savvy might just simply enroll themselves in more programs and receive more assistance, whereas some of the most vulnerable may not know or be able to enroll themselves in programs and receive less. So by having this visibility, you can at least investigate these cases and make sure the assistance is according to the needs, not just based on who enrolled themselves in various programs. And to be clear, WFP doesn't necessarily need to be part of the collaboration. So it could be that in some countries, 2 NGOs are collaborating, in other countries, the UN and NGOs, in other countries, just UN. But the idea is that in these places where multiple actors are somehow assisting the same population, which answers the next question, which is who will be joining is really then these people. And the third part is that it's been, as I mentioned, we've kind of, as far as I know, the first to do this. And it's the challenge has been one, of course, demystifying blockchain, both from the hype and the deep skepticism. I found always that it's very polarizing, that either people are really pro or really against. When you read about it, it's typically articles are very pro or against, and the balanced ones, they take the very good and the very bad and combine it and, you know, think the reader will average it out. And very few actually talk about the middle line, which is what we're trying to trail. And it's a bit of doing by showing. So that's one part of it. A lack of understanding around the technology, the association with cryptocurrencies. So our approach is to show that it works for us. And we've been slowly reaching out to other humanitarians that we work with. So UN Women has joined us. There is another large organization that is considering joining at the moment. And we hope with each one, once we show this collaboration, once we show how this coordination of assistance and optimization, harmonization can work in practice, that will open the door to more. But also the governance framework is actually a really important part of that, because it really embodies what is this about, what are the responsibilities, what are you getting out of it, what do you commit to? And it simplifies the, let's say, the paperwork in a sense, because right now everyone has to sign a bilateral MOU with each other, whereas with this document, it's also a membership agreement of sorts, so that by adhering or agreeing to this governance framework, then you're automatically just kind of joining the network with everything that comes with it. Does that make sense, Nancy?
Fantastic, thank you. And there are some other questions in the chat which I wanted to address. So the first one is related to what you just spoke about. How do we involve international big donors such as the World Bank and the IMF? So maybe not organizations that are in the ground like the UN, but that could support this consortia. Is that something you've thought about?
Yes, so there is a couple of different ways. So one of them, of course, like World Bank also does a lot of academic work on various fronts, including digital identity, but also they do tend to fund typically governments for their citizens and social safety nets, right? And so what we're trying to do here is create visibility among humanitarians assisting the same people. But the governments pretty much have the same issue when it comes to their social safety nets. So there is a Ministry of Housing, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finance, so on and so forth. They all have programs, and they also have the same issue of having a fragmented view of their citizens in various different systems. So this concept, if proven successful in the humanitarian context, there's no reason it cannot be adapted by governments for their own citizenry. which is a big part of what the World Bank and IMF tend to focus on in terms of improving such systems or bringing about more impactful outcomes. So our hope is that having demonstrated this on our side of the fence, we can also, make this available to others. And by the way, we don't sell or charge for building blocks. We offer it for free to members. And our ask is that whatever code anyone contributes or any other technical contribution is made available for free to other members. In this way, from a donor perspective as well, you don't have the current situation where they to fund different organizations who end up developing very similar features in parallel systems. So that money is being, in a sense, not used as efficiently. Whereas here, every money that goes in automatically benefits everyone. I hope I've answered that question.
Great. And another question is regarding an update on the building blocks pilots with the 100K Jordan refugee camp. I think you mentioned that you've extended that pilot and that's the purpose also of bringing in other institutions. Could you share with us where you are in that project and also what challenges that you faced on site?
Yeah, so the 100,000 in Jordan, I mean, it's not a pilot anymore. It's part of the ongoing operation. It's 106,000 to be accurate. We always round down to be more conservative. That is the entire refugee population living in the camps in Jordan that WFP serves. So let's say we hit the limits there. And in March of this year, we launched the project also in Bangladesh, in the Cox's Bazar Rohingya refugee camp, which is the largest refugee camp in the world, hosting the the Rohingya refugees coming from Myanmar. And there's about 850,000 of them living there. So since March, despite COVID and other challenges, we've already reached more than 500,000 of them. So that's more than half. And we hope that in the next few months, we'll reach the entire camp population. From there, one of the interesting things about the camps is that it's a very, very dynamic sort of environment, like 850,000 people, some countries are even smaller. So it's very vibrant. There's a lot of shops within the camps owned by the host communities, so by Bangladeshis. And currently, at least for WFP, most of the entitlements must be spent in WFP approved shops. So one of the things we hope to do is also allow our beneficiaries to shop outside at the shops operated by the host community. And we're looking to achieve a few things by this. One of them, of course, we want to create a multiplier effect in the local economy so that we encourage even the smaller businesses in the local area. The other is that we operate food shops so that the selection might not be always as varied. Some of the more fresh products like fish or vegetables might not be as available. So then beneficiaries have more flexibility in terms of what they want to buy and have more choice of variety. And we hope this will actually play some really interesting market dynamics between the host community, the big name retailers, if there will be specialization between bulkier items like rice or vegetables, for example, in the smaller shops. And, as everything is done via token, we're really interested to see how this interaction is going to work. So those are the immediate next steps. The focus is in Bangladesh. In terms of learning, for me as a project, we've learned that the technology is 10% of the whole thing. And on a relative basis, it's the easier part, partly because we work with very competent people. But change management tends to be the hardest part. Of course, this technology is built assuming, I guess, initially that everyone has a smartphone and connectivity to store their private keys. That is not our reality in Jordan or Bangladesh. We cannot assume everyone has smartphones or connectivity. So we have to come up with ways of managing that. Furthermore, we want to have a common visibility of the people we serve, but of course, we don't want to share private keys across organizations. So one of the challenges we had to solve for is how do you have a common view without sharing the private keys from each organization to another. And so these are some of the things we work with. But overall, the technical challenges have always been easier to deal with than the non-technical.
Thanks, Houman, for your candid answer. There's also other questions around more sort of the application of this network, including, ID and health records or education records. Is that something you're thinking about and that you can integrate? How do you currently deal with identification of refugees?
Absolutely. So just a few points here. One, that yes, the block, as I said, building blocks is a network, blockchain network on top of which many different applications can be built. We have started with, let's call value transfers. So you have something of value, it can be soap, it can be cash, it can be food, medicine, and this something of value goes to someone and this someone redeems it and we account for the whole thing. And we want to have common visibility around this. But of course, that's not the only application. And even with this, we're kind of getting into the financial transaction history, which can be a component of identity. And this is where I want to distinguish between identification or authentication, in one sense, let's say a passport or a driver's license or another biometrics, from identity, which is a much broader concept. And it's the various personas you have, your employment record, your health record, your education record, your permit to work. And then there's the identity, which tends to be, or identification that tends to be issued by some authority, again, like a passport and all of that. The reason I say this is that personally, for the more sensitive information, like information that would be contained on an identity document, like name, date of birth, all of that, that should not be on the blockchain. That should be stored with the person on their device only locally, and perhaps references, verifiable claims, these kind of things can be put on chain. So the end person can authorize every access to that information, or even better, just answer yes, no questions. If I need to be let into a place that only adults go to, they don't need to know my exact birth date. They might just need to know if I'm above 18 or above 21. So these kind of things. So because we're not yet at a stage, at least so far in the countries we are, where the end users have devices with connectivity where they could store the private keys and the actual sensitive information, we haven't gone into those components of identity yet, but we have started with the less sensitive parts, again, under fully anonymous identifiers, such as value of food transfer or value of wash items, which include soap. And having built on that experience, our hope is that in the future, when I believe everyone will have a smartphone and it will be connected one way or another, we can then start exploring these more purely, let's say, or more closely identity related concepts. Over.
Sorry, I'm on mute. So how do you deal with privacy in this network? Do you use TK snarks? How do you ensure that privacy is respected across the network, and especially privacy of individuals?
Yeah, so as noted earlier, we don't put any private information on the chain. So for example, let's say you're a refugee, you come and you get registered by some organization who is in charge of managing, let's say, refugee relations, in this case, in our case, UNHCR. So they would and they have to capture basic information like name, last name, date of birth, all of that. Then they issue a completely anonymous, let's say, identifier that is associated with this person. So I have Houman and I get identifier ABC123. So there's no way to go from my identifier back to my personal information. Then they group this, these individuals into groups, so typically families, and they issue another anonymous identifier. And this is essentially what we work with, because we as World Food Program don't really need to know the name or exact date of birth, but we do need to know it's a group of people, that there's 5 family members, and based on this, we can determine food rations, or somebody else who's providing assistance like, soap, they can determine, okay, each person needs this many bars of soap per month. And so everything is based on these fully anonymous identifiers on a private network, which is not accessible to the public at this stage. And this is what I was saying, that if we do get into more advanced uses of identity where personal information would have to play a role, then we need people to have devices and connectivity so they can store that information along with the private key associated with it on their device, so that none of us have access to it and they authorize the usage of that information, if that makes sense.
Yes, totally. Are there any last questions before we thank Houman for his amazing presentation? Oh, the last one, last but not least, how do we get, can people get in contact with the World Food Programme and the organization so that they can engage with you if they have, application layer proposals?
You can just contact me, Vanessa, if you don't mind. Perhaps you can just share my email, or I'm gonna drop it in the chat.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, all right.
Super. Well, thank you so much, Houman. Thanks for all your time, and good luck with the rest of the program. We're looking forward to how it's going to evolve.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity.
Great.
Bye.
My people come first.